Good morning, everybody. While we're getting set up, my name is Junan. I am an assistant professor in the College of Information Studies and also in the College of Education. And thank you to Ben, Marcio, and everybody for inviting me to moderate this panel. So as you guys get set up with your mics, when I think about my own teaching and I break it down, I think it ultimately comes down to it's a collaboration and a negotiation and a dialogue between instructor and student. And so I'm kind of excited to get some student perspectives today about how we should think about our teaching and learning on campus. So I know that it's going to be interesting, and I think hopefully sparking a good discussion this morning. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Cool. Just before we get started, I'd like you guys to do a quick intro and tell us a little bit about yourselves, and so we can get to know everybody.
I'll start. Is this working? Hello? I'm Katie Day. I'm a senior English literature, and psychology major with a minor in creative writing, and I'm very excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Zoe DiGiorgio. I'm also a senior. I guess I should pull this up. I don't know. I'm a senior English major with minors in German and creative writing.
All right, I'm John Nisnansky. I'm pretty loud, and I'm a history major, and I'm a senior.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Wong. I'm a sophomore, and I'm a studio art and marketing major.
Okay. My name is Ogoya Ade. I am a psychology major and computer science minor.
Great.
Oh, and I am a junior.
Junior, great. So what we're going to do in this panel is I've got a couple of questions just to seed the conversation, and I'd love to get your guys' perspectives on them. And then we want to open up the discussion to you guys, the audience. So if you could think of some questions, if you could ask our panel of students very honest questions about teaching and learning, what would that be? So I want you guys to think about that for a little bit. But just to get us started, so I want to get to the core of what this conference is about. So could you guys tell us a little bit from your perspective what your definition of learning is, and how do you know if you've seen it, like in your classes? How do you know if you've seen successful learning happen?
I think for me, because I'm a psych major and also an English literature major, I have very different definitions of what learning can be. On the one hand, I think of it as a very mechanical sort of like encoding sensory information into short or long-term memory and recalling that information. But I also think that learning or having learned something requires the ability to be able to explain what you have learned in a way that someone who doesn't know what you're talking about can understand what it is that you've learned.
I also have kind of a double definition because from the English side you get a lot of learning through doing and analyzing and discussing. You take a text, you break it down, and you pull the information out. And you self-teach a lot of the time. Whereas from the German side, a lot of the language learning is a very interesting mixture of repetition. It's as you said, it's coding the information, but when it comes to language, I know I've learned a part of speech. I know I've learned a tense when it's something that becomes instinctive. It's burying that information in a place where you're comfortable pulling it out. That's how you know that you've learned it, is when it just comes from you.
All right, so personally, the way I understand things, I feel like I have a big matrix of history as a history major or English or whatever it is that I'm learning. And I feel like I've learned when I'm able to attach something to that matrix, when I can expand that and it fits my overall understanding of the world. And so it's not until I can fully, get it under my fingers that I understand something that I really feel like I'm learning.
I actually agree a lot with what John said. I think successful learning is basically being able to take what you've learned in one class and being able to relate it to something else in another class. And I think being able to kind of come across a real life situation, and if that triggers something you remembered in a lecture, then I think that was successful.
I agree with a lot of the other students on the panel that there are sort of different levels of learning, one being of remembering what you learned, the other being that you can explain it in simple terms to other people, but then also that I think more of the higher level of learning is finding out that you're actually applying it to the world, to your life, actually applying it to other subjects that you know about and weaving a bigger picture. So that's what I think that one of the highest levels of learning is.
Thank you, guys. So I'm hearing things like understanding the world, just feeling like it comes out when you need it, right? That's when you've learned something. If you're able to explain it, if you're able to put it into a long-term memory and encode it, right? So I want you guys to think about what you just said. And then here's the big question that I think all of us as teachers want to know. So what sorts of things have your instructors done to like really promote that type of learning for you? And what advice could you give us? Like, what should we do, in your opinion? And maybe we could start, I don't want to start over here all the time. Let's start with Agua first.
Okay, to think about the idea of one of the highest forms of learning being applying it to the world or to different subjects, I think that that teachers can sort of help that process by not just teaching abstract terms or subjects, but also bringing up examples of maybe how has this psychological concept been used in the world, how has somebody applied it into a program that they created. Basically, I think starting to make those types of connections helps. Yeah, I think.
I've taken a lot of like theory courses in terms of like economics and then art theory, and I feel like in courses like those, it's very helpful for you to kind of relate what you're talking about theoretically and give examples of that in real life. I think examples help a lot. But also with history classes, I found that when they're going over it, the most successful history professors I've had are the ones that are able to make the history sound really interesting by making it into a story, and incorporating humor into a lecture I think is very successful because it engages the students, and whenever you make a joke or whatever, it's usually in comparison to something, and that helps you remember it a lot better.
Sure. So I would say that the thing that has impressed me most in the classroom and helped me most in the classroom is the teacher having a lot of passion for the subject that they're teaching. I don't think there's any substitute for that. I think it's really apparent when the teacher doesn't want to be teaching that particular course, not necessarily through any fault of their own. I understand that professors get allotted a lot of the courses they have to teach, but I mean, you can tell when a professor doesn't want to be there, and you can tell when a professor really loves the subject that they're teaching. And when you have a professor that's lecturing on a subject that they love and they want you to understand, for me, that's really the peak of learning that I've enjoyed at the university.
Yeah, all three of you have said things that I've been thinking about, but I just thought through a couple classes that for me have been most effective, some of them being German, another one being an astronomy elective that I took, which was completely way out of left field for me. But the classes like that and the screenwriting class I'm taking currently, which is really impressing me, is the variety of things we do in the classroom. In the case of the astronomy class, it was we did a lot of different activities throughout, a week, but all of them seemed to like hit on central parts of a lesson. So even if I didn't get the first time, when it was lectured to us, I'd get it visually. Or we'd watch, in German class, we'd watch a video one day, and then the next day we'd play a game related to that. And that's sort of diversifying the way the information is presented, helped me learn the information and then internalize it, which for me has been crucial.
Can you restate the question? Sorry.
Yeah,
I wanna
so
make sure I'm answering it correctly.
thinking back on your classes, what sorts of things have your instructors done that facilitated the learning that, your definition of learning?
Okay.
And what advice could you give us?
Okay, so going back to committing things to long-term memory, I think that one thing that has really been beneficial for me has been the use of clickers, especially in large lecture halls, because I think that when I'm being presented with information and then immediately after being tested on it, I remember that information so much better. And there's actually a study, or probably more than one study, in which students or participants were asked to learn some information for, I don't know, maybe like 10 minutes. And then after that, for the next 5 minutes or so, they were either instructed to continue studying or be tested on the information. And the students or the participants who were tested on the information remembered the information much better than the other participants. So, and I have seen that in my own work, that when I go to a class that does involve clickers and asking questions like that, I do remember the information a lot better. So I think that's one way. Another thing that has really helped me is when a teacher will reference popular culture or current events. So I took an English class about different theories in English literature, and one of my professors, when we were talking about feminism, had us watch Robin Thicke's Blurred Lines, the video, and we just analyzed that all day, and it was so much fun, and we learned so much. And then also, I think that associating new and difficult concepts with things that we already know, pre-existing things in our minds, is also very beneficial. And we call that in psychology elaborative rehearsal. So for example, if you're learning about the different parts of the brain and you want to remember the hippocampus, you could say, if I ever saw a hippo on campus, I would never forget it. And the hippocampus is associated with memory. So the idea here is that you have the schema in your mind for hippo and campus, and these schemas are all interconnected. They're like almost like word clouds with all of these different things attached to them. And so when you think of hippo and campus, you're now bringing up this new information also that's associated with it.
Thank you, guys. So my reaction to all your guys' answers are, that's a really long list of stuff that I need to do. So I need to be passionate. I have to tell really good jokes, which I'm not so good at. I have to have a variety of activities. I have to check for your understanding a lot, so like using clickers and different tools, and referencing the things that you guys know about. So that one's really hard, because I don't hang out with you guys on the weekend. I'm not sure what your popular culture is. So, but that's a good list, I think. So as we think about that, I want you guys to take us a little bit more into detail. So can you take a moment and think about a very specific best experience that you had in a class? And can you give us a story of what that experience was? And maybe we can learn a little bit about those specific things. I want to start with John first.
Oh man, I thought it was safe in the middle. All right, specific story. So it's a good thing I can say his name. Dr. Smead in the history department was probably the best professor I had last year in the way that he was able to engage us. And my best classroom memory in all of college was being able to ask him questions, or any of the other history professors that I've had. People that really know their subject inside and out and are able to take these questions, which can be so broad and often off topic and often asked because people wanted to hear themselves talk, and then they can just bring that right back to what we were talking about. And for me, I learn by asking questions. And so having the time to do that and having a professor that has a sufficiently large knowledge base to answer whatever that question might be. I mean, when you have professors and you just can't stump them with whatever, it adds a lot to a lot to the understanding that I have of that material. And so I really appreciate when that happens.
Pass the buck, which way is it going?
This way.
Okay. I think one of the most effective classes for me is just thinking broadly and in terms of how much I learned from start to finish and things like confidence levels. I started taking German at the university, so I came in with absolutely no prior experience of the language, and I took a year off to focus on my major, and then when I came back to the language, I took German 204, which is a review of grammar concepts. Having taken a year off, I started that class trying to squeak out a sentence and just falling on my desk, just burying my head on my desk because I couldn't think of how to articulate what I was trying to say. And over the course of the semester, you know, we had to start small because it was a review class. Not all of us remembered everything. So it was starting small with things like just breaking things down into, you know, challenging us to use German as best we could to explain a concept. Then we'd build it up. You know, now we're going to do a game. As I mentioned earlier, kind of like that the role plays, changing it up visually. We had all these different activities. So if your comfort level, if you weren't feeling too comfortable with adjective endings, for example, there were multiple different ways of addressing it. In some cases, it would be group work. We would, you know, talk together. The teacher would do an activity out of the book, and we would take turns answering questions. So that way, you know, one student wouldn't be able to dominate the conversation. We'd each get a chance. And then as we got on in the semester, she'd incorporate videos and other visual, she'd use images and PowerPoints and different handouts. So I stopped feeling total dread when I walked into the room. And by the end, I was actually at a fairly proficient speaking level as compared to where I was at the beginning. So it was a lot of, you know, working in groups, working separately. There was a lot of things that happened in that class that just really helped my ease in language learning, and that meant a lot.
Let's get one more story. Who wants to share? Katie? Yeah.
Okay. One specific story. So I took, a couple of semesters ago, I took Psych 334, which is interpersonal relationships, with Dr. Dylan Selterman. And one day, we were learning about gender roles and gender norms. So a man is supposed to be this way, and a woman is supposed to be this way. And in order to start a conversation, we began the lecture, or the class, by doing a little bit of role-playing. So he would present us with a scenario. For example, one of them was, the man is drunk and trying to drive home, and the woman is trying to get his keys from her. And so the boy and the guy and the girl walk up to the front of the classroom, and then he's like, oh, but the girl plays the guy, and the guy plays the girl. So it was this parody on gender norms and gender roles, and it really got us thinking about how silly and absurd they are sometimes. And it sparked a discussion that lasted the entire class, and it was so great. Yeah.
Thank you. So I hear that we have folks anxious to ask you guys questions. So I'd like to invite you guys to come up. There's mics around the room. And I'd like to treat this as a conversation. So we're all eating breakfast, drinking coffee. And for the instructors out there, this is your chance to ask a really smart group of students what they think we should be doing. So.
First of all, thank you so much for being here and your willingness to be honest. And I loved many of the things that you said. And so I am a professor that really looks at the research on education and uses that in my teaching. And so I do a lot of active learning, a lot of the things that you have said. I will say that I am in the STEM field, and the issue that I run up against, and I'm just curious as to your remark on this, is that my students in general want lecture. They want pure lecture. They don't want to have to come in and think. And I just wonder, and I'm going to still do it because of the research in cognitive science and psychology and education all point that this is the direction we need to go into, and everything you said is telling me that's the direction that you want me to go into. But I struggle with that, especially on my student evaluations when you know, they basically want to come in and lecture. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. You guys, someone want to tackle that? Okay, Sarah?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that when I mentioned the astronomy example earlier, because that was a class that was really effective for me. And I had no background in that course, but hour 15-minute long lectures twice a week still managed to impart a lot of knowledge on me, even though I wasn't actively engaging every class period. But in the same way that I mentioned, we didn't just sit and go through slides of a PowerPoint the entire time. When the professor, she would take a minute to demonstrate she made a point of drawing attention to them, and she'd bring them up on quizzes and exams, but she'd do these active demonstrations of different principles, and she would make a big deal of them, and those usually helped reinforce things she was saying. It gave us a bit of a break from just taking notes, looking at the screen, typing. It was a chance for us to, I guess, kind of take a breather, refresh, process what we already just absorbed, and then see it in action. And things like that, I think, really helped for that sort of lecture style. I know I took a Shakespeare lecture a couple semesters ago, and it was a lot of the professor. He would occasionally integrate PowerPoint slides and visuals. I don't really remember much specific information from that class, though, even though I love Shakespeare. So it's definitely like the different degrees of engagement within a lecture can affect learning as well.
Just to piggyback off of what she said, I also think that, like I was saying earlier, I think clickers are a really good way to continue to lecture, but also have people engaged in the information without having to actually say anything or to remain anonymous. And another thing that I really liked was I took Psych 100 with Dr. Ryan Curtis, and he was really good at lecturing most of the time, but every once in a while just stopping for a second and saying, talk to your neighbor about this and come up with a good idea, and then we'll share those ideas with the class and move on and continue lecturing. And I liked that also.
So I'd like to clarify this, ask a clarifying question. So maybe John or Cheryl or Ogwe, I want to get into your psyche a little bit. When do you think you've enjoyed lecture, and when do you think you've not enjoyed lecture?
All right, I can answer this one. I love lecture. Maybe I was born like a curmudgeonly old man that doesn't like change, but I like lecture. I don't like new things. So I end up really frustrated when things aren't a lecture. So I'm in a class right now, and I guess I won't say which class that is because I'm about to complain about it, but we meet twice a week, and one of those sessions every week is a discussion. And it's endlessly frustrating because I love the professor, but for half of this classes, she isn't talking. And it's like, I pay a lot of money to hear you talk and hear what you think about this, and I have to listen to my classmates read the text, and it's like they don't know anything more than I do, which is not a lot. And so it's, I don't know, that any time that the professor isn't just dumping knowledge on me, I feel like I'm not getting as much out of that situation as I could. And so I feel like anything short of lecture is not meeting as much information as they could be giving me.
So could I ask you, John?
Sure.
So what I'm hearing in your response is you like clear expectations because lecture you're comfortable, you know what you're expecting there. And you also like your professors actually talking to you too, right? Like you like that we know something and you want us to share that with you. And you like that there's a routine and that you know that this is what you're going to do in the class, right? I wonder if those are what you like the most, and not that you want to hear us talk for 12 weeks straight, right? I wonder, but that's something to think about maybe. I'd love to
certainly
get your thoughts about that. But Cheryl or Ogwe, when do you guys like lecture? When do you not like lecture?
I actually like going to lectures a lot too, and I actually have, I took micro last semester and then macro this semester, and both of the courses were structured in a very similar way. And so both of the professors had pre-made PowerPoints made, and I'm a pretty visual learner, but I think sometimes professors misconstrue what that means, and that just because there's like a PowerPoint going on behind you, it's not really the most effective way to teach. Because I find that in like large lecture-based halls, when you have a PowerPoint up there and you have a bunch of words, students usually just immediately copy down what's going on. And usually when they're copying it down, they're not really, analyzing what they're writing down. And while they're writing, they're not really paying attention to what the professor is saying in addition to, the bullet points. And so a difference between micro and macro was that the macro professor actually would act out some of the examples that were on the screen. So like one time he like ripped up a piece of paper. He's like, okay, this is a dollar bill. Let's say that's the Federal Reserve. And so he kind of acted it out, and that made the class much more engaging than just simply, copying down bullet points.
I agree with Cheryl as well. Typically, lecture-based, to me, it seems like it requires more, you need to zone out and you need to be in the zone of writing down what's going on the board, making sure that you don't miss anything, and also in the other ear, trying to listen to the teacher and write down notes about what they're saying as well. I've adapted to that over, however many years I've been in school now, but but I do think that it's more engaging, especially in more technical fields, like with my computer science classes. It is a lot of it is a lot of lecture-based, a lot of like technical details on the PowerPoint, like small details that you'll have to remember, and it is better when the teacher doesn't just explain what's going on, but is giving, once again, active examples. So they show you the slide, but then they say, okay, so pretty similar, let's consider that this goes with this metaphor, and like they act out a metaphor in order to explain the concept, which before it was just like a technical dribble that you don't really understand. So I think that is really effective, especially in more technical classes.
Great, thank you guys. More questions? Yes. Yeah.
I have a question about how much you remember from your courses. So I was just in a conversation with a bunch of employers, and we talked about, they said, but students have taken these classes, why don't they remember anything from them? And so I was really curious for if you could kind of reflect on the courses that you've taken, the more lecture-based, large-scale courses, and the more active-based courses, and give me a sense, if you would, of do you remember different amounts of things from those courses?
Let's jump in.
This is tough.
Say, do we have someone who wants to start? I can start. I don't need to talk the whole time. But it really depends. Like I was talking earlier about how I have like a big matrix of things that I understand, and if I can hook things onto that, then they stick. I'm really good at remembering what I actually learned. The problem is getting to that actually learning point. And so for certain things, like I took Italian, and it's my understanding that some Italian professors are here, and I'm so sorry for having been in your classes. I was really bad at it because I couldn't get to the point of really understanding it and really being able to retain it. And if it never makes it onto my like matrix of understanding, then I'm never going to remember it. I might be able to pass the test, but if I'm not really processing that, I'm not going to carry it with me. But anything that I'm able, I'm able to contextualize with what I already understand about the world or that subject or anything else, those are the things that I remember, and those are the things that I feel like I should remember because they add, like I said, a greater context for what it is that I'm doing and whatever it is that I'm doing.
Great. Thank you, John. Yeah.
My name is Margaret, and I teach a clinical course that requires some reading prior to coming to class. So I would like you to help me understand how can you make students read the section they are supposed to prior to coming to class, because I have ways I have tried to improve that, but I'd like to hear from you. Maybe what else can I do? Thank you.
I'll start. Going back to Psych 100, Dr. Curtis, also Dr. Roberts, I think, teaches Psych 100 sometimes. One thing that I noticed in that class that they would do to encourage students to read was have a quiz every week, and it was just a quiz on ELMS that you would do at home before you came in, but the questions were very specific so that you would have to click on every link and watch every video in order to answer the questions, and I thought that was a really great way of getting everyone on board and everyone to read the exact same things.
I was going to say the same thing, that a quiz, yeah, we care about our grades, so that usually helps a lot. You mentioned Dr. Roberts. I was actually in his Psychology of Evil class, so he also was very effective at getting us to do the readings by having assignments that you had to do outside of class. Like, okay, so you have this this document. It tells you which readings you have to do, and then it has I think it was like sort of like questions you had to answer, but it was very in depth. Like it went through the entire reading. It sort of like led you to the areas that was more important for you to understand. And I think that was sort of like a unique experience. I've never had someone like lead me through a reading, and I think that was effective. Although I'm sure that many people complained because it was in depth, but it helped a lot with actually learning the information.
I've taken enough English classes where I've walked in and I've been the only one who's done the reading, and it's kind of terrifying to have to carry the whole discussion. But I found this semester I've done some classes, and quizzes definitely are the most effective way of putting fear into students' hearts and getting the reading done. But this semester I'm taking a German literature class, and I'm sometimes scared to do the readings just because the material is so meaty. It's so weighty. But what the professor does, which helps me, and I think it helps a lot of other students, is he'll assign questions. Some weeks he'll have us do them before class. Other days he'll just have us look at them, and then we'll work on them together. But those questions help guide my reading. So even if I'm not understanding every word on the page, I know some specific information to look for. And if I can't find that information, then I can go back, reread, and it really helps me kind of build up a comfort with the material and confidence to approach it then later in class.
That's really great. So what I'm hearing is there's almost a purpose to your reading. Mm-hmm. So the purpose is either there's going to be a quick check-in with the quiz, or there's guiding questions that you know you're going to work on those problems, right? So you need to do the readings. Or a guiding activity that guides you to look at specific parts of the reading, so you have to pay attention and try to find them, right? So I think that's really cool, like that you guys, that different classes have given you like a purpose to do the reading, and that really pushes you guys to do that, right? So I think that's great. Question?
Yeah, so I'm Kent Norman, Psychology Department, and I'm in the Human-Computer Interaction Lab. And I've been to this conference for like 22 years when it was originally called Teaching with Technology. And then we realized technology isn't always very good. But I have been teaching with technology for 25 years, teaching in the teaching theaters, the AT&T teaching theater, the Plant Science teaching theater, and do experiment with a lot of online discussions, blended learning, flipped learning, all these things with technology. You've mentioned some technologies like clickers, ELMS, and other sorts of things. So what I'd like to know is, what are the best examples, what's the best use of technology, and what's the one that we really got wrong? What's the worst technology you've ever seen? And OJ cannot answer this because she's currently in my class right now.
Let's start with Cheryl.
I feel like PowerPoint can be a hit or miss. Like I said before, if it's just bullet point after bullet point, it's really not going to help much at all, because it's basically just like the conclusion of a chapter in a textbook. And but I feel like a good example of a PowerPoint that worked was the one where, you know, the professor also substituted with, you know, real life examples, but also in terms of like art history, when there are pictures on the board, you know, it can, whenever they point to something, it makes it a lot more clear about, you know, what they're talking about this specific piece.
Okay, it's a tough question to answer, but I would say it's no specific technology. I would say that it is least effective when it either doesn't work. So things that don't work are just distracting. So, like I've had professors try to put like videos or interactive sections into their PowerPoints. And as soon as that doesn't work and they need to take 3 minutes to go on the internet and pull up the YouTube video, like its effectiveness is gone. Like I don't care anymore. And so if it doesn't work, it's not working. But also things that are gratuitous, things that aren't necessary for what it is that's being taught. So sometimes clickers are excellent tools, and they're the right thing to use. And sometimes PowerPoint's an excellent tool, and it's the right thing to use. But if it's being shoehorned into the subject, then it's no longer effective. If it's taking away from the substance of the course in favor of just trying something new, then I don't find those things particularly effective. I find them distracting. And so sometimes technology is a really wonderful thing and a great tool, but when it becomes distracting in of itself, I'd say that's when it's ineffective for me.
Can you give an example?
Did I give an example of things that were bad or distracting?
Yeah,
Like when is it gratuitous?
All
Yeah,
right.
exactly.
So for me as a history major, almost any time it's used. So I don't know, like we have like a very proud legacy of like, I don't know, 2,500 years of lecturing instruction. And for history, I think that works really well. But I also took chemistry, and I really enjoyed when technology was employed there. I liked using the clickers. I liked the interactive PowerPoints that we had. And I think it's just suited to certain classes and subjects, and not in other places. And I don't know, when I feel like a professor is, like I said, trying to shoehorn it in, like they're putting it in because they think it'll be good. And it's really hard to fault the professors that do that, because they tend to be the best and most engaged professors. Like they're only inserting this because they think it's gonna help. No one's maliciously wasting their time to try to implement technology. And I understand that, but yeah, I think sometimes it can get in the way.
Yes, question.
John, you just talked about the best and most engaged professors. I think from our perspective, I'm Stephen Brown in business school, we could talk about the best and most engaged students. And without asking your GPAs, I'll wager that you guys are probably up among the best and most engaged students, otherwise you wouldn't be here. I wonder to what extent can we take what you say, or can you speak on behalf of it, and what can we learn for the vast majority of students who maybe aren't doing all the reading beforehand, which you perhaps are, and so on?
Yeah, me doing the reading every time is definitely not true. English means sometimes I've taken 2 or 3 courses, all of which have very heavy reading loads. So I guess I'm just trying to think of those days when I haven't done things like that, and what kind of things work when I'm having a busy week and I'm not completely prepared. And in the case of the reading questions, I know the reason why I brought those up are because those are the things that have helped me even when everything is due and the world is spinning. It helps me collect myself and to look at things like that. Now, are you talking about specifically how can we use what we're saying to engage, or what we're saying to apply to other students? Yeah, I think things like, I think what we're saying here is not only what things engage us, what things work for us, also work for a variety of different students. I know I've TA'd before, so I've also seen and gotten feedback from students. I won't say my students because some of them are older than me, but just the idea is that I think that what we're saying here today, and a lot of the things that work for us, do apply across the spectrum in the sense that they work for a lot of different classes. And the students that are really struggling no matter what, you employ a variety of lecture styles, you give clickers, those are the students that I think need to do more than just go to lecture or go to discussion. And that, I guess, putting it back on the teachers, that just means, I guess, office hours, advertising that. Some students will never use it even if they were 24/7. But I think going off the last question about technology, the one thing I would say to, above all, do to reach every student is to keep an open line of communication no matter what. Be good with emails for students.
Can I reframe this question that maybe we could think about it in a different way? So Zoe, your answer was great because you said, I'm not always doing all the work. There are weeks when I'm overloaded and I prioritize one over the other, and that's really helpful to me because then I realize my students have lives and maybe my class that week is not, number one on your list. But that gives me some insight into, the psyche of what your lives look like. So can you guys think of other examples of why you or your peers in any given week might not be that engaged in any given course, or what are the obstacles that
I guess one main obstacle, which most of you probably already know, is that a lot of technology in the class, or allowing a lot of technology in the class, because it is very easy to get distracted, and we are, especially if it's like a lecture-based class and you don't have to be totally engaged if you don't want to be. It's very easy to just go online, to send out some emails if you need to do that, or work on another assignment. So I guess that's one of the main things.
I mean, I feel like the best way to get students, to want to do what you have to do is to give them a purpose for doing it. Like we said, if you want them to do a reading, you can give them a quiz. Or, you can give them, make them do the readings because in your discussions you you reference a lot back to these readings. So if they don't do it, then they probably won't get it so much. And I mean, sometimes if you want to have like active learning, I had a discussion where we were supposed to act out like Cato, a Tragedy, which was a play. And, I think they were trying to make the course a little more interactive, but essentially that didn't quite work out because, there wasn't really a purpose to it. It didn't really help us understand the material even more.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for 2 more questions, 2 quick ones. So we'll do one here and then one over there. Yep.
Thank you. It's more of a comment than a question. I hear you saying that some of you really like lecturing, you like to learn from the instructor, etc. And I spent 35 years lecturing and loved it until I found out nobody was talking. There was no more exchange, not a lot of questions. Everybody had their phones in their hands. And then I learned about flipped classrooms, and I said, wait a minute, if I'm the only one talking in the lecture hall, why don't I just record that? And so I found that a flipped classroom format satisfies the people who love lectures and they can hear it anytime they want, 3 o'clock in the morning while they're getting their tickets for the basketball game, whatever they want to do. And then we can also, in the classroom, focus on engaging in activities that will demonstrate to them that they really understood. And after 37 years of teaching, I just learned 2 years ago that my students were understanding the material, because I have found that lecturing to students and giving them a midterm and a final, because those people who are good test takers love lectures and taking tests, and then they can leave. They don't have to engage in a lot of things. The difficulty with the flipped classroom that I found is that when you start trying to engage students with different activities at different times, they have to pay attention more. They're not just going to a lecture hall at a certain time. They have to actually go into Canvas and read what the instructor said, because today I'm doing this, I have to take a quiz, etc. So I found that some students find that difficult because I have a lot of students coming saying, oh, I was supposed to take a quiz because they can't come into the lecture, into the lab unless they've taken the quiz. Oh, I didn't know I had to take that quiz. So, but I really believe that the flipped classroom concept really satisfies both types of students, and somehow there's a balance in there.
Just curious, how long are your lectures online?
Well, the 81 lectures for my class go from 5 minutes to like 25 minutes. So,
okay.
At any 1 week, there might be up to 2.5 hours worth of video lectures to watch.
That's a lot.
Well, yeah, but they used to be in the lecture hall for 6 hours a week.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, for me, when I have to watch a lecture at home, I totally agree with what you're saying, first of all, and I think that a flipped classroom is a great idea. But for me, when I have to watch a lecture at home, about 10 minutes into it, I start getting distracted and looking at other things and not really engaging in what the professor is saying.
Yeah, but the answer to that is within 15 minutes after you watch the video lecture, you have to take a quiz. And if you weren't paying attention, you're not going to be able to answer the questions.
Right.
So that engages them fairly quickly. And there is no, there's no midterm or final anymore. The quizzes are taken right after the reading and right after the videos. And haven't got any complaints from anybody, even the ones that don't like lectures.
I think these are really good insights, because it's like we're hearing about tips to keep attention, and then we're hearing a purpose right after, right, watching a lecture. And I think these are the lessons that I think are pretty cool to hear. So we have a couple minutes left and one more question.
All right, so first of all, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think it's really helpful to, you are our user ultimately at the end of the day, so it's really great to hear feedback from you. And so my question is about feedback. In your ideal, so this is one method of feedback, and I'm just wondering, in an ideal world, how would you give your professors feedback?
Can I ask what you want feedback of?
Yes. Just in terms of how they're teaching, we've heard a lot of things about how a whole semester will go by and you'll have faculty that you love that you are really not liking their style. So if you could give them feedback, how would you, just in terms of teaching, of how they're teaching and how you're learning?
I think I'm taking professional writing this semester, 393 technical writing, and we actually had an assignment due a couple weeks ago that I thought was really beneficial for a variety of reasons. And it was an assignment that was both a evaluation of the course so far, what we had learned, what we were working on, and of course it being a technical writing class, it was a memo. We wrote it as a memo to help learn that style. So not only was it teaching us the material, but we were also able to review the class in that way, say like what has worked for us so far, what has been our biggest difficulty with the class so far. And the teacher even asked, what did you think of my teaching style? What's something I could do? So midterm evaluations, I think, are a very interesting thing. It was fortunate that this professor was able to integrate it as a lesson, but things like sending surveys in the middle of the semester, I think, aren't a bad idea because it shows that, if something isn't working, the professor is going to be aware of it sooner rather than later. And if you have a concern that you haven't quite found an outlet to voice, like if a student wants to say, I'm afraid that my grades are going to be poor because I haven't gotten grades back after a certain number of weeks, things like that. I know that really helps me kind of evaluate the class, think about what I'd learned so far and apply it, but also to think about what my goals for the class were and whether or not the professor was meeting them.
Yeah, I think I agree with everything that you just said. Mid-semester surveys are a great way to see whether or not things are working, and I think having them be anonymous is another way for students to say without fear of being judged whether or not things are working well. And also, when I really enjoy something and when I really think that something is working, I will email my professor and tell them.
So I think we're just about out of time, but I want to thank all of you all as faculty for asking really great questions, because I think I learned a lot just kind of hearing the dialogue of like what we're concerned about and what you guys are concerned about. And then I'd also like us to give a big hand to our panel of students for spending their morning with us.